In the last lecture, we made our routing work, we added routes, and we gave Angular a place to load our currently active component. But one issue we have is right now we can only navigate around by manually typing it here in the address bar. Not super convenient, and whilst it is important to be able to load a route directly from the address bar, it would also be nice to have some working links here in our navigation to have these tabs work. So let's add some links to our application. And if we go to our app component, we see here's our navigation. The first thing you might think about is, hey, we can, or we already have this ref attribute here to be precise. So here we could have ref, just slash to load our root route. Here we could have slash servers. And here we could have slash users. And if we now save this, we added all the routes, the paths we set up in our routes configuration to our navigation here. And hence, if this reloads and we click the tabs, hey, this is indeed working. Now we are correctly loading the route we want to load. Okay, this tab is not updated, but I will come back to this later. But the reloading is working. And that's the issue. It's reloading the app. Watch this reload icon here. Do you see this? We refresh the app with every link we click. And that's the natural behavior, because with every link we click, a new request gets sent to the server, and it returns us a new page. And since this page is still our Angular app with the routes registered on it, it is able to give us the correct route. So the same thing happens as if we entered this manually here. That, however, is not the best behavior, because it means it restarts our app on every navigation. That of course means our whole application state will be lost, and it might not really be the behavior we want to offer to the user. So this is not how you should implement navigation. How should you implement it then? There is a special directive Angular gives us. Let's get rid of all these ref attributes here. So this is not how we will navigate around. Instead, let's use this special directive. It's called router link. Now, router link like this simply is able to parse a string where we could pass just slash. So just this string slash to router link here. Now this will tell Angular that this element on which router link is placed here, this anchor tag here, will serve as a link in the end, but it will handle a click differently, as you will see in a second. Let's now also add this to the servers link, so router link equals slash servers. And I will come back to how you may write the path here in the next lecture. Another way of using router link is with property binding. So you can enclose it in squared brackets. And now, of course, you can't just pass slash users here, because this would now search for a property with that name, which would even be an invalid name in JavaScript. So now you have to pass a string here with single quotation marks, or better, an array, which gives you a more fine-grained control over router link. And I will come back to this later when this is especially useful. Here in this array, you now specify all these segments of your path as elements in this array. So the first segment in this case is only a string slash users. And if you had slash users slash something, you would have a second element here, which is then just something without a slash. The leading slash here is only needed to make this an absolute path, and I will come back to this in the next lecture. For now, we'll get rid of this. Now, this array notation is not super convenient, but soon you will see when it really gives you an advantage, or when you need this notation. It allows you to construct more complex paths very easily. So with this, we set up our free links using router link, either by passing a string or this array, which allows us to define our individual path elements. With that, if we save this and have a look at our application, now you see it still reloads, or it still gives us the components, but it doesn't reload the page. If you watch this reload icon, nothing is happening there, because router link catches the click on the element, prevents the default, which would be to send a request, and instead analyzes what we passed here to the router link directive, so this path or this array of path elements, and then parses it and checks if it finds a fitting route in our configuration, which it of course does, because we defined all the paths we're using here. And this is how we can navigate around with the router link, and this actually is how we should navigate around because it gives us the better user experience, it doesn't restart our app, therefore it keeps the app state, and it's much faster than reloading the page all the time. You can, of course, still type something here manually, so that will still work, but if you're inside of the app, using router link is much better. In the last lecture, we added this navigation, and I also mentioned that you can change the way you use your paths here. Right now we use //servers, or even with this more complex notation, we have /users as the first element. Now what happens if we just use servers here like this and just use users like this? Let's save this without deleting /. Now if we click there on our links, you still see this works absolutely fine, nothing changed. Now let's go to our servers component template file here. And for now, let's quickly add an anchor teller element here, where we also add a router link, where I add servers again. Reload page would be a fitting description. So on this servers component, I now added this router link where I basically want to make sure that I stay on the servers page, which I'm already on. So if we go to servers here, we see the reload page here. And if I click it, you see we got an error. This error here occurs because it doesn't find a route which is servers/servers. Now this error won't occur if on the servers component, I turn this to /servers, so to an absolute path. It was a relative path. Here, if we now have our console still open and I click reload page, nothing occurs here, no error occurs, because now it simply navigates to localhost 4200/servers, as you can see down there. And if we turn this back to a relative path, the difference was that now it tries to go /servers/servers. So with a relative path, it always appends the path you specify in the router link to the end of your current path. And important here, the current path depends on which component you're currently on. That is why we could remove that in our navigation, where we also use relative paths, because that is in our root component. This component is not loaded through the router, so this root component always sits at localhost 4200/nothing. So this is always at our root level, which is why we can use relative paths here too. But one layer below that, once we loaded a route, for example the servers component, this page is only loaded if we are at /servers. So if we add a relative route here, this will now get appended to this route we're on, so it will try to load servers/servers, and therefore it gives us an error in our case because we haven't registered a servers/servers route. Now, of course, using relative paths inside of active components, active routes, might be a nice thing if you have nested routes. Right now, it will only break the app though. Now, you can also use relative paths with ./ at the beginning. This is the same as having nothing there. And you can even navigate around like in a folder directory. You could add // which means go up one level, and then add this to the path here. Now, if we do this inside of our servers component, you will see if I hover over this, now it again only tries to load /servers, and therefore we don't see an error. Because now it first goes back one level, which basically is to just our root path, so it removes one path, and important path depends on the route you're on. So if you were on servers/something, and this would load this component, it would remove both. So this does not necessarily only remove one segment here, it removes the currently loaded segment, you could say. So in this case, it removes this and then adds /servers again, which is why this works. And this is how you can navigate around absolute paths with a / at the beginning, which will always get appended to the root domain, relative paths without a / or with ./, which means added to the currently loaded path, or // and you can even add more of them, to say, well, go back one path, go back another path, so always seen from the currently loaded component on. And If that is something which is not 100% clear, you will see it throughout its module, but also feel free to play around with it, add your own routes, add some nesting, add more complex paths, and see how this works out. But for now, let's continue with our application. I will remove this reload page link and let's enhance this a bit more.